that now. And I will pass it over to Glen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
There, I am unmuted. Thanks very much for the invitation, and great to meet you all. I know some of you from other interactions and other committees. So the focus of the talk today is to take a look at a candidate for like a high-profile species for a bird-friendly city, to suggest that there are lots of ways to learn more about birds in your community, especially through both the social and the natural sciences. Sometimes we think primarily about the natural sciences in terms of when are the birds here, what do they do, what do they need, when are they migrating south, what do they do while they're in a different country, and then when do they come back. But at the same time, if we're trying to promote bird conservation in our bird-friendly communities, we should be wanting to understand how people interact with birds as well. So there the social sciences come into play. And I'll use the case study of the purple martin in Alberta, in Camrose, and highlight some of the work that we've been doing there to understand both the people taking care of the birds as well as the birds themselves and some of their habits that are relevant to martin conservation. So let me get started. This is me holding a banded purple martin, but also one that had carried with it a geolocator during the past year, which was able to track its daily movements. And it's been a fun project to work with because I've been able to interact with lots of good folks who are wanting to protect martins, but also wanting to understand from a research point of view, what they're doing, where they're going, and also help me get to know my community a lot better. So there's the geolocator just freshly taken off its back and the female martin. Okay, so I wanted to tie this into bird-friendly city programs and the Nature Canada organization of this. Many of you are from communities that have been nominated or are going through the nomination process or been designated already. And the bird-friendly community is a great way to profile the value of birds and the way that people can benefit from birds and birds can benefit from people. And there's lots of good research to show that those interactions are healthy. And the bird-friendly city identifies lots of ways that people can connect to birds and to support bird conservation through education, policy development, habitat, and so on. And all those are on the score sheet for going through the process for nomination. And in Camrose, if we were to proceed with a bird-friendly city or community nomination, we would probably focus on some of the work that we've been doing with purple martins. And I'd like to highlight some of the ways that we've learned a little bit more about the dynamics that you might want to incorporate into your own communities. So these are just things that we've investigated here, and I hope that there will be applications for your own communities as well. Okay, so a bit of context here, as most of you have seen this slide before, the plight of our bird populations over the last 50 years or so. Raptors and waterfowl and seabirds are doing fairly well. Forest birds and water birds are holding their own, but those bottom three lines in orange and red and pink are declining. So shorebirds and grassland birds and aerial insectivores. And if we can use the bird-friendly city competition or program to support especially those declining birds, that would be a great assist. So the purple martin is in that group of aerial insectivores. So take that pink line. Can you see my cursor, Autumn? Yep, great. If you take that pink line and break it apart, you will see that that group is made up of two subgroups, swallows, swifts, and nightjars in blue, and flycatchers in red. And guess which one's declining even faster? It's that group of swallows. And the purple martin is indeed in that group of swallows. So the population has declined 80% over the last 50 years, which is just amazing and really deserves a lot of attention. So let me introduce you to the purple martin, which is North America's largest swallow. It's not listed on Canada's Species at Risk Act. In Alberta, it's not listed. BC has some listing for it because of narrower habitat. But it's an amazing species that is fun to interact with. First of all, it's the largest species. It's colonial, like some of the other swallow species, and they love to live in human-provided nest boxes. So the typical one there, like the bottom left, shows 12 openings. So they live in a colony of 12, and sometimes landlords have 2 or 3 of those poles in their backyard. So you could have a colony of perhaps 30 or 40 pairs of martins. So they're colonial. They're aerial insectivores. They fly and eat insects on the wing, and they fly a lot higher than other swallows. Tree swallows are closer to the ground. Martins can go 50 to 100 meters high, and they eat a lot of insects, moths and dragonflies and flying ants. Contrary to public opinion, they do not eat many mosquitoes, even though some people use that as an argument to promote purple martins. They're beautiful. There's a female on the left and a male on the right, and they have an amazing migration route. I'll show you that in a second, but in short, they fly to Brazil and back, and they spend most of their annual cycle either in Brazil or en route. Okay, good. So population of martins as a subset of that declining graph shows that they are indeed declining, and they're stabilizing a little bit. You can see towards the last 10 years, fortunately. This next graph shows where the purple martin populations are decreasing in red and are increasing in blue. And you can also see the range of the entire population. So first of all, the eastern population extends from Texas to Florida, all the way up the eastern coast, up into southern Quebec and Ontario. And then it cuts across the prairies into Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And here in central and slightly north of central Alberta, we're at the northern or northwestern extent of its range. That's the eastern population. That's the one we'll focus on. There is a western population from coastal BC all the way into northern California. And then there's an interior desert population in Arizona and New Mexico. So this population in blue suggests that they're increasing here in Alberta. And the big question is why? What are we doing right here when there's big red spots in other places where they are declining? And if we can decipher that riddle, then maybe we can make some better actions. Okay, so I'm from Camrose, central Alberta, just about an hour southeast of Edmonton. And I helped start the Camrose Wildlife Stewardship Society. It's a local group of like-minded folks, a small group of a dozen or so folks that are interested in urban, local wildlife management. So we work with the city of Camrose, and we try to promote green space stewardship and wildlife management and research and education. And we do some environmental education projects, monitoring, some policy development, and so on. So we selected the purple martin kind of like a flagship species. It has high profile, connects well with people. We could use that as a way to really transmit and generate educational impacts. So for the martin, we've got a program where we set up nest boxes on public property, and then we find a nearby resident to act as a landlord for that purple martin house. A lot of people have their own houses in their own backyards, and we let them do their own thing, except to provide education and interaction. And so we recruit landlords, we support them with information, we encourage them to interact with each other. And then we undertake a monitoring project every year. You can see the top right graph showing the population in blue of martins over the years. We're going to start the census again this year in just a week or so. And then the number of pairs in orange. And then the bottom right map shows where all the purple martin colonies are in the city. So Camrose is a city of about 19 or 20,000 people, surrounded by agriculture. There's a creek running through it with some natural water bodies. And the residential side is mostly on the west. The commercial side is mostly on the east. Okay, so from a research point of view, and that's where I come from. I'm a professor at the University of Alberta, the Augustana campus, and I wanted to combine my interest in conservation with the possibility for conducting research. So I'm straddling the social sciences and the natural sciences. And the social sciences have a lot to contribute to bird conservation, and it's a growing field. And you can see that it covers a lot of different disciplines that are relevant to conserving wild species. I have focused in the past on economics, human geography, social psychology a bit, development studies, and I'll show you some examples of how we've applied that here. Okay, whoops. So one of the key characteristics of marten conservation is making a connection with the landlord. The landlords are the people who put up the nest boxes, who monitor them and manage them. And the landlords really generate a lot of the success or failure. Many people put up nest boxes and just leave them be, and then soon they're filled with starlings and house sparrows, and they don't support purple marten conservation at all. But the landlords who manage those boxes, who evict house sparrows and European starlings, who care for the birds, are more likely to have a full house and lots of fledglings, perhaps up to double the number of fledglings as those who ignore their houses. So there's a significant impact there. And some of the recommended maintenance practices are to check the nest, to control some of those sparrow and starling competitors, deal with parasites like blowfly larvae, clean and maintain the house. And some landlords even support the martens during bad weather. They'll feed them supplementally. Sometimes they'll even provide some warmth in those cold nest boxes. So landlords are key. So we wanted to learn more a little bit about these landlords and what drives them. So we interviewed these landlords around Camrose, and we asked them what drove them. And we found that their motivations could be divided into two categories. The altruistic category, they're doing it for the betterment of the martens or something other than themselves. It's to help more generally conserve nature, help the martens in particular for future generations so they can have a chance to interact and service to the community. The egoistic ones are more motivated to provide benefits to themselves. It's not a negative term. It's not selfish. It's a motivation that provides some benefits to oneself. So they love to interact. They enjoy the beauty and the noise and the color of martens that are new to them. Some people like to achieve success, and so they'll talk to their neighbors about their marten success. How many eggs have you got this year? How many nests have you got this year? How many of you young have you lost? And so they'll compare notes that way. Social interaction is a big one. They love to get together and talk martens, and they find that a really important social outlet. And some of them just provide, some of them achieve great enjoyment from watching and working with martens. So knowing that helps us understand how we can support martens. And so I want to just give you a little bit of a backdrop to a natural science project, and I'll come back to it in a second. This has been happening with lots of bird species that are migratory, putting on geolocators, which are these little devices in the top right. They're little small backpacks. They weigh about 1 gram, and they are battery powered, but not transmitting. Therefore, you can put on these geolocators, but have to recapture these birds before the battery dies, in this case, a year later. So we put them on in the summertime, release the birds. They feed their families. The adults and the chicks fly south through the winter, and then they return. And then we search for them and then recapture them, remove the geolocators, and they're healthy, and then download the data from the geolocators. So we have special bands like this yellow one on the bottom right. And once they come back next spring, we have to spend a lot of time searching for them with scopes and binoculars. And when we do discover them, it's an exciting time. So there's the geolocator itself, having been wrapped around the hips and the legs of the bird. And the maps that are downloaded are really valuable to help us identify the speed, the direction, the layover spots, and so on. So this bird, you can see the band number here. We found, we batted it in early July. It left Camrose on August 4th, and that red line tracks its pathway south. It had spent a few days in the Dakotas. Where is that? What's that? That's south, just south of Minnesota. Went down and it traversed the Gulf of Mexico, spent 4 or 5 weeks in the Yucatan Peninsula. Not a bad place to spend a fall layover spot. And then that was probably due to molting. And then finally entered Brazil. There's an Amazon basis. It spent maybe a few weeks or a month or two at about 3 or 4 different spots. The black line suggests that it left about April 29th and it arrived back in Camrose 2.5 weeks later. Pretty fast northward migration. So that whole project involved a lot of people, and we needed to locate these, capture them, add the geolocator, release them, and then wait for them to come back again next spring. And so we needed people to look for the leg bands to identify the birds, which we did. So that brings up another study that we did, and that was to look at the benefits of participating in a citizen science project. So we found that they were motivated by lots of different reasons. They wanted to learn about martins. They wanted to help a species. They wanted to see the birds up close, meet people. When we asked them afterwards what their benefits were, nothing really changed, except in particular, they liked meeting like-minded people. So the social interactions again rose to the top in terms of a motivating factor for people to either be a landlord or to participate in a citizen science project. So that raised the issue of how do we promote that social interaction? We've been having a few get-togethers, like barbecue, where they came together to share, but eventually in 2010, we offered a Purple Martin Festival. And the 2023 version is coming up on this Sunday, on Father's Day. So if you're in the neighborhood, you can come on down to Camrose and celebrate your father by joining in the Purple Martin Festival. So this is our logo with a speed demon Purple Martin with goggles and thing around its neck. So here's a brochure from a couple of years ago. We have guest speakers, we have a workshop, we take people out to an active Purple Martin colony, and we have lots of interesting topics that they hear about. And they have a chance to talk to each other and share stories and tell others about what they've learned, ask questions, get excited. We recruit new landlords. We've had many different speakers. You can see a museum curator here spoke, a photographer. Our very first festival had John Acorn, the original nature nut, sing and speak to us. Kids get to see a nest up close. There's a workshop for active landlords. They learn from each other. So it's a great chance for social interaction and learning. And the social research told us that that was much needed. And we've learned a little bit about who comes. There's 80 to 100 people that come. They're elderly, 60 years old and over. Most of them are from outside Camrose. So draws a lot of people from, one year, someone from Toronto flew in just for us, people from Lloydminster, the mountains. They spend a little bit of money, which is relevant to rural local development. And most of them are happy and they want to come again. 93% want to come again. So just to summarize that section, that social science research has helped us to recruit people to the project. And that might be relevant for your bird-friendly community projects, how to engage people, how to draw them in, what do they want, and what can we provide them? It helped us recruit people to research, the citizen science research, and we couldn't have done it without them. And it provided a lot of good rationale for what kind of networking and what kind of educational projects we should undertake. And that connected to the community because they realize there's an economic benefit. People love to brag about Camrose having a lot of green space, and martins are part of that, and they require that kind of habitat. So it's developing a positive reputation. Okay, so that has dealt with some of the social science questions. I also wanted to share some of the natural science questions and then show a way that they can be linked together and be mutually supportive. So we had a few research questions that we wanted to take a look at. The first one was about their annual patterns, and that involved that geolocator project. I'll show you that in a second. We wanted to learn about local preferences by martins for nest boxes and location, and which stewardship practices are best. What should they do if they're short of time? What are the most important things? So the geolocator research I showed you, this bird flew from Alberta, spent some time in the Yucatan, flew down to Brazil and back. It was exciting to wait for that moment when we could discover them back in Camrose and we could capture them again and download the data. It was really, really fun. This one crossed the Gulf of Mexico right there. Here's another one that crossed the Gulf of Mexico on the southward journey, but traveled around the Gulf of Mexico on the northward journey. All that's valuable information. Where it spends some time in Yucatan, that's a hot spot for conservation interest there. Which are the spots in Brazil does it hang out in? And so on. So that's their annual movement. We also wanted to take a look at where martins go from year to year. And so that's called dispersal. There's natal dispersal, where the young go for their first breeding cycle, and then breeding dispersal, where they go between breeding cycles. So to do that, we banded a lot of birds, local banders, and then we looked for where those banded birds were in subsequent years, and we captured them and read their bands and compared their locations. So we had to rig up a really ingenious capture design with this puck board with long filament fishing line hanging down. We wait off 10 meters away, wait till our target bird went into the hole and yanked on the line, closed the little flap and captured the bird. Then we could lower the house, reach inside the opening door, and then capture the bird, take a few measurements, and then read the leg band and let it go again. So we're able then to compare location, direction of these birds from one year to the next. Here's what we found. First of all, most of the birds have a high site fidelity. They return back to their original breeding spot year after year, sometimes to the same pole, sometimes to the same hole within the pole, but often into the same community. So look at this one. The older after second year females, 85% of them return to the exact same place, which is amazing. A little bit less so for the juvenile birds, both male and female, the first two bars. If they do disperse, they disperse for just a short distance. So it's a nearby dispersal, only 1 to 20 kilometers away. Of course, there are exceptions. We had one example of a 1,000-kilometer dispersal. I think the record in Canada was a couple thousand kilometers, went from Ontario to Alberta. But for the most part, it's nearby dispersal. So that means your success at hosting martins means that there's going to be nearby success in subsequent years if they disperse just short distances. And they need to have nest sites that are available in those short distances. So we learned about the juvenile birds disperse just a little bit more than the older birds, and the males disperse a little bit more than the female birds. And there's some solid reasons for that. In terms of direction, there was no differences in the age or sex cohorts, but for the most part, they dispersed to the east and to the northeast, which is interesting. If that's connected to climate change at all, dispersing to the north is a response perhaps to a warming climate where they're moving into areas that they were suited to. And the northeast direction cuts across the gradient of warmer and colder temperatures. So we'll see how that plays out. Okay, the last study we looked at focused on which characteristics of the house and the location of the house and the landlord practices produced more martins. And so there's a lot of anecdotal information. There's guidebooks and websites that say you got to do this, this, and this in order to attract and to successfully have martins produce young. And here's a whole bunch of them. The color of the house, the material, should it be wood or aluminum? Should there be shrubs at the bottom? Close to water, close to other houses, close to your human house, height, and so on. So I attracted a student who did a directed studies project, and we examined this. We had data for years and years, and then we could examine the characteristics of all these. Here's what we found. 4 characteristics rose to the top of being most important. Having the house nearby to water was important, 200 meters, although birds can go farther, and they've done that and done well, but close by means it's easily accessible. They use water for drinking. The water provides habitat for their insects, and so on. That house also needs to be accessible. In other words, it should have an up and down winch on it to put the house up and down so that the landlord can manage it for competitor nests, parasites, and the like. Another one is the fact that there's no shrubs at the bottom. That's probably a predation issue, perhaps found or evolved in other locations where snakes and raccoons and whatever else could have climbed houses that were wooden. But that's a remnant impact here. And lastly, the ownership. If they receive lots of information and mentoring, that increased the chances of having martins successfully nest there. So the houses had some key characteristics. Now we can encourage new landlords and existing landlords to maintain those kinds of characteristics. We asked them what were the practices that they thought were most beneficial. And so we determined that water, accessibility, shrubs were beneficial. We asked them what they thought were most beneficial. Some were unsure, almost a third. Controlling predators, 18%, they thought that was beneficial. Active management, a general term. A good location, 8%. Controlling blowflies, these are small flies that go into the nesting material. They lay their eggs, the eggs hatch, and the little larvae attach to the young martins and they suck blood. So that impacts their survivability. Cleaning nests was another one, removing competitor nests. So there's a lot of connection between the recommended practices and some of the practices that we've proven now. And then lastly, we wanted to ask, well, what's a landlord supposed to do once the house is up and working? Which practices are recommended and which ones seem to work? So we pulled all the practices out of the various guidebooks and websites, and those are listed here. 8 of them showed up. Most people clean nests, 60%. Half of them will remove blowfly larvae, 43 add nest material to start the season. 20% exclude predators like merlins and owls. Most of them remove competitor nests, and a few add eggshells to help with nesting. A few feed the martins, and a third trap competitors. Just doing a one-to-one comparison statistically, we found that those top 4 had a benefit for martin occupancy in terms of the number of years with martins, the number of holes with martins, and just generally having martins present. On average, of those 8 practices, the landlords did 3 of them. 10% of them did all 8. Those are the real keeners that we should support and have them become ambassadors or mentors. A third of them did nothing at all. They just put up their house and walked away. So those bolded ones seem to have a statistical connection. We also did some multiple linear regression. It's a fancy statistical test to compare all the types of variables together in one go. And when we did that, cleaning nests rose to the top and removing blowfly larvae rose to the top. So if a landlord is short of time or is uncertain, we could advise them that these are the top 4 or even the top 2 practices to undertake. They also mentioned a lot of constraints, so they're slowed down. For example, some of them mentioned time. They're just running out of time. Some of them don't want to manage a nest box because they don't want to disturb the young. Well, actually, that's not a worry because landlords or martins can handle any distraction. Some of them are worried about merlins, the falcon that can prey on adult martins. Sparrows and starlings nesting, and some sparrows and starlings can actually peck at the eggs and peck at the young to kill them. Some of them just lack enthusiasm because they have low martin numbers there in green, so they are unlikely to engage in much if there's not any martins there. Okay, so just to wrap up then, try to think about the connections between the social science research and the natural science research. It's important to base that all on the trends, aerial insectivore numbers are declining. Swallow numbers in particular are declining, and amongst those are purple martins. Purple martins are not endangered, they're not even at risk, but it's helpful to know about them so that we can apply what we've learned about them to species that are working their way towards endangerment. So let's put on our creative thinking caps to apply across species. So what are the needs? Well, martins, they are almost reliant. The eastern population is almost fully reliant on human-provided nest box. It's an amazing and weird conservation story. There's just a few other species in that category. So that means we have it under control. But if we removed any contribution towards nest boxes, martin populations would crash. And that means we should address those needs before the decline happens. And special proactive efforts are in our control. We can build those boxes, we can mow around the base, we can put them in good locations. And there's a long history of doing so. So in order to think about the links here, it's valuable to see, well, what can we learn from one side of the equation to support the other side? So on the social side, because this species requires so much human intervention, we want to learn about, well, what do the people want to get out of it? So what are their motivations? What are their benefits? And who could be involved? There's lots of people. And why do they want to assist? What are their barriers? We can address some of those things and support their engagement in bird conservation. And then we should be then asking ourselves, well, what should we ask them to do? What are the best practices? Where can they put out those boxes? And so hopefully we've tried to answer that. Even with the dispersal study, we can encourage expansion of the range of purple martins if we know where they're dispersing to. So I encourage the folks involved in bird-friendly communities and researchers to think about ways that we can use existing research. Maybe some of these projects will trigger ideas that you can undertake in your own hometowns and home cities. And hopefully you can begin monitoring success. So whatever ways you want to measure that in terms of species numbers, population changes, connecting with other conservation groups, hopefully you can put together a picture that can evaluate how well you're doing. Lots of challenges, of course, but hopefully we can overcome those together. So some of the lessons we've learned, it's good to connect to communities. They will support you, and we've received a lot of support from Camrose. Lots of diversity and partnerships can help make greater progress. The profile, martins are an engaging, lovely species, and there's value in raising that profile. Finding local champions to push ahead and building your work on some sound science will really provide a good basis for making progress. Lots of ideas for the future. Just my quick brainstorming here. There could be some on your list too. Education is really important for bird-friendly communities. For martins, landlords are really important. On the natural science side, lots of ideas that are still to be untaken. We even proposed to the city of Camrose that they name themselves the Purple Martin capital of Alberta, or Western Canada, or Canada. I'm sure there's others that have already claimed that. So we presented to City Council. We had a rendition of this big tower that would have been welcoming people on the western side of town. Unfortunately, City Council said no to that idea. So we tucked our tails behind our legs and scurried away. But I think the idea is neat in that it can connect some aspect of nature to the residents and to the people visiting our city. And it could be valuable for other ideas as well. So special thanks to all these groups. And there's a few publications that have come out of this project. If you're interested, I'd be happy to share them with you. I'll put my email in the chat. So thanks very much. And back to you, Autumn. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Glenn. That was an awesome presentation. I really learned a lot, and I know folks here on the call did too. Got a few questions in the chat, and then if anyone has any other questions, feel free to come off mute if you want, or and ask them to Glenn. The first one from Rocky: are purple martin shells particularly sensitive to pesticides?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer to that. the provision of oyster shells to nesting martins help strengthen or provide calcium to the females that are laying eggs. Are they sensitive to pesticides like we would have found with DDT and the like in decades previously? That's a very good question. I don't know. They are very reliant on flying insects, which are really affected by pesticides. So there may well be a linkage there. So I need to talk to my agricultural pesticide friends to find out the answer.
Yeah, that would be interesting though. The reason I ask is I noticed in an interpretive sign yesterday, I was visiting a marsh and they said that tree swallows' eggs were particularly sensitive to pesticides. So yeah, give us a follow-up on that one.
Thank you. Good idea.
Thank you, Rocky. And then we got another question from Penny. Is there reduction in numbers due to loss of food, habitat, or both? And
Right.
I don't know, Glenn, is it correct that purple martins are only adapted to human-made structures for their nests?
Right. The eastern population is in the west, and if Penny's from BC, I think she's implying she's from BC. The western population is less reliant on human-built houses, so they use natural cavities from woodpeckers and other things in the woods. But they've also been found nesting on rotten openings in piers on the coast. I saw some at where did I see them? On Vancouver Island in coastal BC. There's a strong conservation project to promote martins on coastal BC, and they're finding some success. So that's a good news story. And then the numbers, insect populations are declining across North America, and that's going to be affecting these species in particular. Habitat for sure, especially amongst these birds in the east that are reliant on human-provided nest boxes. But even so, for those that don't, the ones in the desert are using tall cactus. The ones in the coast are using mature trees. Many of those are declining in numbers, and therefore the nesting possibilities are declining too. So there's a combination. I can't hear you, Autumn.
Oh, sorry, I was double muted. I do that sometimes with my mic, sorry. Thank you, Glenn. So another question we have from Rocky. If settlers bring the starlings, should settlers wage war on them? Colonial mindsets, aren't urban environments somewhat novel? We must tolerate the settler-indigenous mix.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot of issues there to unpack. Yes, European starlings are not native, but they've become naturalized. Same for house sparrows. Many people are really uncomfortable with managing starlings or sparrows. The idea of evicting them is disruptive. Some people are uncomfortable removing a nest that has eggs in it, for example. However, other landlords go to the extreme and they will trap adult starlings and house sparrows and euthanize them regularly so that they are removed from the area around their colony. So there's a lot of extremes. And I don't when I advise an upcoming landlord, you've got to choose your own comfort zone. But those who are really passionate about maintaining and promoting purple martins really feel strongly about that. And sometimes that's a turnoff to people that just want to engage more softly in this kind of project. So yeah, you got to find your comfort zone. As for colonial mindset, boy, if I had to choose between a native species that's declining and a European species that's come in, I'd certainly err on the side of the native species, but controlling those non-natives around my colony isn't going to solve the problem for all of North America. I realize that. Urban environments, yeah, a really unique area, a really unique kind of habitat that involves really strange dynamics in terms of temperatures and the availability of people, the kinds of habitats available. A really good question. There's a whole area of study called urban ecology that would delve into that a lot more. Thank you.
And then we also have a question from Claudia in regards to the city rejecting the Purple Martin capital proposal for Camrose.
Yeah, why did they reject it? Yeah, good question. They had recently chosen another logo or saying, which is something about getting on stage. And that hints at the famous Big Valley Jamboree that Camrose hosts every August long weekend, and other sort of productions that there. So they had just designated that new slogan and wanted to push that ahead a little further. And I understand that Purple Martins are a narrow and niche target for the other 19,000 people that live here. So I was slightly amused when they said no, and it didn't hurt my feelings, but we did start a conversation, and that may return again if we pursue bird-friendly community status.
Thank you, Glenn. I really enjoyed your presentation there. Does anyone have any other questions for Glenn in regards to the Purple Martin Festival or Camrose Wildlife Stewardship Society, Purple Martin landlordship in general?
Well, thanks for setting up Camrose Wildlife Stewardship Society, and thanks for this presentation.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Glenn. I'll go ahead and unpin you now. And thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, feel free to stick around for Brendan's presentation on the bird-friendly building code. Oh, there's one other question from Tiffany that I see. What does cleaning nests entail? What does cleaning nests entail?
Yeah, at the end of the season, the nest sometimes can have or be occupied by other parasites. And so removing the soiled nesting material, cleaning it out, scraping away the mud that has accumulated, and then closing it up for the winter. And then in the springtime, opening it up, making it available to martins who are returning, and then sometimes adding some nesting material that helps sort of kickstart the nesting process for martins.
Thank you, Tiffany, for that great question. I remember I saw my first Purple Martin condo in Dunnville in Hagersville, Ontario, but I think it hadn't been maintained for a while and was near more of a marshy area, so it had been taken over by other species. But we hope to engage those residents again and hope for a future landlord to take it over. Awesome. Great. So Brendan, if you like, if you're able to share your slides now, please feel free to do so. Brendan Samuels is the coordinator of Bird Friendly London and also a PhD researcher at the University of Western Ontario studying window collisions. Brendan, are you okay to?
Yep. Just 1 second, just getting it set up. That was a really great presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. I have never seen Purple Martins in the wild before. I look forward to it. I'm always, when I'm down at Long Point in Southern Ontario, out looking for them, but no success yet. Okay, so just sharing. This is what happens when I have way too many tabs open. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
It's just loading up for me.
So screen
There we
is-
go. We're good now.
Okay. Thank you for making space for me to talk to you guys. So thanks for the introduction as well. I'm here to talk to you from the road, actually, about something kind of time sensitive that we are hoping to mobilize in BC with help from people perhaps on this call or through contacts you might have access to. So as Autumn mentioned, I study bird window collisions. I really appreciated Glen's emphasis on intersections between biological sciences and the social sciences, because that is certainly at play here when we talk about birds crashing into built infrastructure. I'm going to just quickly run through some basic stuff. I know you are probably familiar with the window collisions topic being involved with bird-friendly cities, but of course the reason we care is because birds are declining. And one of the major drivers of those declines are mortality. A leading cause of mortality for wild birds are collisions with windows on buildings. This is a program called FLAP Canada that I'm involved with. And every year we lay out birds that are collected in the downtown area of Toronto and elsewhere. And you can see the extent of it is pretty severe. Birds crash into windows on buildings. There's several reasons why this happens, but usually it's because birds just mistake the reflection on the glass, or they fail to see glass that's transparent. They see a mirror image of a tree, or they see tree on the other side of the invisible glass, and they're just going to try and fly towards that. A point of misconception, a lot of people think that this is a tall building problem, that this only happens in downtown areas. That's not the case. In fact, most of the time birds are crashing into windows on buildings. It's happening at or below the height of surrounding trees around the building. And most collisions happen at low-rise buildings and homes, which are way more numerous than the tall buildings are. And that is a tricky thing, because a lot of the policy framework that we have developed for ensuring new buildings are built safe for birds doesn't really touch residential. It's mainly focusing on the bigger, taller buildings, and this is a gap. There are various things that municipalities can do, those involved with the Bird Friendly Cities program or otherwise, to make it easier for homeowners to retrofit their windows voluntarily. You can't really make homeowners do a whole lot outside of just giving them information and making it really easy. And so, for example, in London, our municipality pitched in a few $1,000s. We bought a whole bunch of these kits and we're distributing them to low-income households. There's a number of different grant programs offered by municipalities that can be leveraged for this kind of work. However, that's not what I want to talk to you about today. I am working on a campaign in Ontario to update our provincial building code. And the reason we need to do that is if we don't, it's left up to individual municipalities. And we have about 16 municipalities in Ontario that have bird-friendly guidelines or standards or requirements in place. And the rules are a little different everywhere. And in all of the cases, it doesn't apply to residential. It only applies to larger buildings. And so when I showed you that graph earlier, where residential is a huge part of the problem, the only way we can really get at those new buildings is through the building code, which applies to all structures. So here's a picture of a layout we did at Queen's Park. This is where our legislature is in Ontario. And we've been leading this campaign, trying to bring forward legislation to make this happen. And we're also really fortunate to have developed a lot of political support for this. So in Ontario, 3 of the 4 major political parties, being the Ontario NDP, the Liberal Party, the Green Party, have all signed on and said, yes, we should put a bird-friendly standard in our code. This should not just be a municipal issue. Let's just put it in the building code. So all new construction in Ontario is harmonized under that standard, the CSA standard. So why am I here today? We're also doing this at the national level, by the way, trying to update the national building code. The provincial building codes will eventually be amalgamated under one unified national code. This is a petition in the House of Commons. We're waiting on a response from the government requesting that update. But the reason I'm here is because in British Columbia, right now, you guys are updating your provincial building code. In fact, there's a consultation that's ongoing until this coming Friday, June 16th. I've included a link here to where you can submit comments online. And I'm just going to quickly walk through what that process looks like for your information. Again, I just want to emphasize the deadline to submit comments here is Friday. That's not to say the building code is updated on Saturday, but this is, I think, a really critical time to submit feedback. If you visit the link here, and I pasted it in the chat on Zoom, and you just click this, that's highlighted, you will see a few links on that page. The online survey is probably the easiest. However, you can also download a document in Word and then email it to the address here. And if you click the survey, there's a section here called Windows, Doors, and Skylights. This is the applicable section of the building code update that is soliciting feedback right now. So you'd want to check off this box. If you visit the next page on the survey, this is the box you need to check. This is where they're collecting feedback. It's not very clear. It's kind of suggesting that this is the only possible context in which you should provide feedback, but make sure you check this box and then you can enter whatever text you want here. I've provided sample text here that you can copy and paste, or you can adapt it yourself. Basically just highlighting, this is the standard we want implemented and this is why. Linking it to biodiversity, linking it to our federal commitments to biodiversity and halting the declines of nature. And also referencing that this is being considered at the national building code level and in Ontario. I think you guys have a real opportunity, being that you've got an NDP government out in BC. In Ontario, the NDP is in favor of this change. It's the Conservative Party that's saying, no, we will not do this. So I think by linking, hey, you know, if it's good enough for the Ontario NDP, it should be good enough for us. Or, you know, we've got an NDP MP at the federal level backing this. I think there's conversations to be had along those lines. So feel free to use this text in your feedback. I've provided some suggestions here for where groups in BC might want to take this. And I want to emphasize, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've been developing a campaign here in Ontario for some time, and we'd love to help you guys. Reach out to me at brendan@flap.org if you want to strategize. I think the critical thing, again, is this week is the deadline for submitting comments through the survey. However, I would suggest there are other ways to apply pressure. So for example, if you could find out if there are any MPPs, particularly NDP MPPs, who are fond of birds, consider reaching out to them and find out if they would be willing to co-sign a petition. And you can petition to the government, there's a link here, asking them, can we put a bird-friendly standard into our building code? And if you get enough signatures on your petition, they believe if the petition is certified, then they are legally obligated to give you a response. You can read our National Building Code petition here. I've included a bunch of hyperlinks to kind of how this is working in Ontario, the letter from the Ontario NDP that was co-signed, and then access to the bird-friendly building design standard has been made free online. If you click this link, you can share this with anyone who might be curious about it. So again, these slides are linked in the chat. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I would look forward to supporting any advocacy out in British Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. That was awesome. I also posted the links to the survey and the website Windows, Doors, Skylights section in the chat as well. I really appreciate you bringing this to our attention, especially with the urgency of Friday coming up. And I really hope that this is positive and that we get that cascading effect, since we're showing the urgency of this at all levels.
Yeah, indeed. There's a real opportunity here. I think promoting this on social media is good too. Even just an infographic that says, get bird-friendly design in the building code. The public is welcome to click through and submit comments as well. So if the government hears about this from different perspectives repeatedly, I think we're more likely to get a word in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brendan. And to answer question in the chat, can we get these links in a follow-up email or presentation slides? Yep, I will be sharing that with everyone today, and the recording will also be made available on Nature Canada's YouTube channel. I don't know if I'm hoping it will be up before Friday. I think this, I read somewhere just based on last week's recording, it takes like double the recording time to process. So I'll pass it off to the comms team at the end of the day today, and hopefully they can get it up by Wednesday at the latest. Thank you so much, Brendan. And does anyone have any other questions for Brendan or Glenn today? It's awesome that the CSA standard is made available for free on that BirdSafe website as well, because that could be a confusing barrier if you go down a Google rabbit hole too. Great. I'm going to stop the recording now and then just talk briefly about the upcoming changes to the application process for Bird Friendly Cities program at Nature Canada. But if any folks do need to run, I know we are at that hour meeting mark. So I really appreciate everyone coming by today. I'll make sure to share notes afterwards with folks and share slides as well. So thank you all so much for being here today and taking the time to meet with us. Stop the recording.